Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today on how to prevent fraud and abuse. All lines are currently on mute, and if you have any questions, please use the chat box and we'll address these during our Q&A period at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar will be presented by the company Beanworks. Beanworks has an exclusive partnership with Sage as their official AP automation provider in North America. Sage AP Automation, powered by Beanworks, is designed to seamlessly integrate with your Sage ERP to save your team from time-consuming and error-prone tasks while maintaining complete control over the entire AP process. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce Beanworks account executive, Tina, who will begin the presentation.
Awesome, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today on the agenda, we'll be covering types of fraud, waste, and abuse, challenges and the research. We'll jump into the steps to prevent AP fraud, of course, a product demonstration of Sage AP Automation itself, and finally, we'll end off with the Q&A period. So we've categorized the most common types of risk in AP as phishing scams, duplicate payments, and expense abuse. Accounts payable, or AP fraud, is one of the most common types of fraud, exposing companies to risks that come with operating a business. It can be done by an employee, a group of employees, an external party, or collaboratively by an employee and an external party. I'll briefly define each of these. So, phishing scams, this is an attempt to access a company's account or fraudulently gain access to confidential information. Duplicate payments, this is one of the top payments-related pain points for companies, according to a 2019 Level Research report. A vendor might be getting paid more than once because they've received the same invoice in different formats or due to employee error. And lastly, expense abuse. This happens when an employee exploits a company's expenses for personal gain. We're going to take a deeper dive into the accounts payable challenges and look at some of the recent research. To better understand how CFOs and financial teams have been impacted, we looked into some recent research. Based on current studies, click rate on phishing attacks has risen from less than 5% to over 40% with COVID-19 scams. 69% use audit controls to detect fraud. And in an April 2020 PwC study, 35% of respondents said they don't regularly test or audit their controls. We're also seeing that one of the biggest factors driving change right now during the crisis is remote work. And one of the biggest challenges in the sudden shift to a remote work culture is communication and collaboration. Now let's take a look at some real-life examples of fraud. Here's an example of external fraud. The victims were Google and Facebook. Now, between 2013 and 2015, both companies were scammed with more than $1 million. The scammers set up a fake account of an actual business and sent phishing emails to Facebook and Google. The employees at both companies were familiar with processing multi-million-dollar transactions with the original company that the scammer was falsely posing as. The emails were altered, by a character or two to make it look like it was from the original company. So if you don't have transparent approval workflows in place, picking up a scam like this can be extremely tough. Next, we have a case of internal fraud. From 2004 to 2019, $4.5 million was embezzled from a company in Oregon called Weyerhaeuser. The company was accused of submitting fraudulent invoices for a fake vendor. She would generate checks in AP to pay the false vendor, wielding her position to then direct those payments to her personal account. This year, the employee admitted to mail fraud, aggravated identity theft, and tax evasion. Finally, a case on expense abuse. This is an interesting story that was shared by Bob Shoyett, who is a senior chief financial officer at a consulting firm in New York called Melillo Consulting. Speaking on expense abuse, Bob said, "The most glaring case I uncovered involved a sales rep who, for many months, expensed $250 to $400 lunches and dinners. The employee claimed that he was entertaining several prospects at a time during these dinners. But during an audit, I randomly matched his calendar to a date of meals on his expense report, only to find his calendar empty. Bob called up the restaurants on the sales rep's receipts and found these were all receipts for meals served to a table for two. Bob immediately informed HR and investigated meal expenses for the past 12 months. The total amount of abuse was in the thousands. As finance professionals, we all understand the significance of approvals within the AP department and how this could add more layers of control. So now we're going to launch a quick poll here to get an idea of everyone's approval process. So how many levels of approval do you have? Meaning, do you have one person approve the invoices or payments? Do you have two people that review them? What's it like in your case? If you could take a moment here to complete the poll, it should just take a quick second, and let's get an idea of what we're working with. All right, so let's give it another 20 seconds or so to complete this section. So again, do you have any approvals in place? One person or two people, three people or more that are reviewing invoices? Or if you're not sure, that's completely fine as well. All right, and let's end the poll now and take a quick look at the results. Okay, perfect. So it looks like we've got majority of people saying maybe 50%. We've got two people in their layers of approval. So at least two people reviewing the invoices. That's great. Some of us, we've got one, and even more of us have three or more, which is awesome to see. Perfect. And now let's compare that with another quick poll we'll run on this next page here. And this relates to the level of confidence in your company's tools to combat fraud. So let's launch this one. How confident are you that your company is protected from AP fraud? So it's great that we've got layers, and people reviewing the invoices and payments, but how confident are you that this is protecting you from AP fraud? All right, let's get your responses in and we will launch the results in about 10 seconds here. Okay, let's take a look at what the results here are in terms of everyone online today. All right, good to see. So some of us not at all confident. That's okay. Hopefully, as we go through the presentation today, you'll be able to see, the importance of adding the levels of control into your business. And it's awesome to see that most of us here are, somewhat confident and some are very confident. Awesome. Thank you everyone so much for participating in that poll. Hopefully this is, interesting to see as well in terms of who we've got online today and the different types of industries and companies as well. All right, now let's continue on to the next slide. Now that we understand the types of fraud, let's take a look at a 2019 study conducted by Level Research, highlighting the top challenges with AP. So this graph here represents the top AP pain points as voted by finance professionals within small to medium-sized enterprises. Percentages are the number of respondents who identified these challenges as their top pain points. Now, the reason we are looking at small to medium-sized enterprises is because based on this research, they often pay the largest inefficiency costs. The effects are also reflected in soft costs, such as staff productivity, process efficiency, and data accuracy. Small to medium-sized enterprises typically experience challenges around manual data entry and routing, as well as high rates of lost invoices. Now we have an understanding of the top challenges, we'll share some recommendations that you can adopt outside of an automated solution. So we recommend enforcing at least two levels of approval, one by a manager and the other by the purchaser. Always require any purchase to be approved by someone other than the person who purchased the goods. Secondly, separate approval processes for invoices and payments. By separating roles for approvals and payments, you reduce the chances for funds to be rerouted or otherwise misappropriated. Verify vendor details by visiting their website, calling their number, cross-checking the physical address. And lastly, set up delegation of authority. This applies primarily to determining who should have the authority for specified spending limits within certain categories of expenditure. Now, we're going to take a look into how to prevent fraud. We'll cover again the phishing scams, vendor management liability, identify waste, and expense abuse. For each of these, we'll share advice on the steps you can adopt to prevent these without automation. And then we'll follow up with how automation prevents these. Let's start with phishing scams. As I mentioned earlier, to prevent fraud, we recommend that organizations, have at least two levels of approval, which was awesome to see. Most of us online today indicated we have at least two, if not three or more. Now, always make sure that the person's manager approves the purchase and the finance department is the final approval. So they have the final last say in that the approval process. The finance department should have the highest level of knowledge around how fraudsters might be trying to scam a company's finances. Next, detect signs of a scam. The most common sign that an email is related to a scam is the domain. Domain addresses are unique, but fraudsters will purchase domains that resemble supplier domains, but they're always slightly different. We saw this in the example with Google and Facebook that we discussed earlier. Also, take a look at invoices that don't have information such as an address or a phone number, supplier purchase prices that seem high or too low, and vendors that don't use a work email address and instead use a free provider such as Gmail or Outlook. Now, with automation, you can prevent phishing scams by identifying fraud before it happens and before it's paid with tools within an automated payment solution. You can also establish multiple online approval channels to create accountability and therefore enforce practices such as verification of vendors and detection of suspicious invoices. And finally, separating payments workflow works as another approval channel separate from the invoice workflow. Next, with vendor management liability, we recommend creating a form to initiate any changes within vendor banking details. When your vendor asks for their bank details to be changed, you should have processes in place for these kind of requests. Secondly, install positive pay so that mismatched items are identified and reported for pay or no pay decisions. Lastly, follow contact management and escalation procedures to ensure that there is only one person in the vendor organization that you are taking in changes from. So, how does automation support vendor management and liability? Well, a third-party payment solution can provide vendor management solutions, and most will identify 100% of vendor payments. With automation, you can gain faster reconciliation, obtain third-party payments liability. Banks don't assume liability for fraud, and the inability to reclaim those payments puts companies at risk. Outsource vendor data management, and the outsource solution provider will also manage vendor and bank onboarding for you. Moving on to how to identify waste without automation, we recommend auditing spend in different categories to identify any overlaps. For example, audit software tools used by different departments and look for redundancies and opportunities to cut costs. And planning and tracking spend through purchase orders helps to eliminate waste as well. By matching 100% of invoices to purchase orders, you can ensure that all AP spend is pre-approved and tracked against an approved total. How does automation help in preventing waste? Well, it flags duplicate payments within the system. With a two-way sync, it ensures automated or automatic reconciliation, elimination of data entry errors, and verification of which invoices have been paid. Automation also prevents duplicate payments by flagging them before they're paid. It restricts paying unapproved invoices until the approval process is complete. Also, it eliminates reissuing of payments. Now, advice on how to combat expense abuse without automation, we recommend auditing employee expenses on a regular basis. If you remember the example we discussed earlier where the CFO audited the sales rep expenses that were noted on client lunches and dinners, but they weren't actually, and they were used for personal meals, catching this earlier, of course, would have prevented all of that expenditure. We also recommend having a policy documented and signed by employees. And finally, segregation of duties. It is generally recommended that a person not approve their invoices. Again, we've talked about this, how we should typically have, at least their manager and another layer approve the invoice. Now, with automation, you can prevent abuse, expense abuse in AP through digital controls, gain visibility into expense abuse and where the source of the abuse is, and activate faster reimbursements with elimination of paper checks. Once organizations adopt an AP automation solution, they greatly improve their risk management capabilities through improved visibility, tracking, and controlling invoice and payment processes. We can all agree that AP doesn't have to be the most chaotic department in your business. By opting for automation, increasing visibility, and using a robust digital system, you can significantly improve your entire accounts payable department. This makes it easy to see exactly where those funds are going and how they're being processed and managed. Now we're going to jump into the product demo itself so you can see how automation does all of what we just spoke about. So now let's move on over to the product. And before I jump into the nitty-gritty details of each of the modules here, I'll quickly just explain the user experience and the user-based permissions, so it's easier for you to follow along as we go through. So you'll see here on the left, we have 3 modules: purchase orders, invoices, and payments. At the top of the screen, this is the workflow, which flows from left to right. And here in the center, we have the workspace. Over on the left, you'll notice the organizational structure. In my case, I do have several companies set up. So if you do have multi-entities, that's completely fine. We can have them all available here so you can manage them all across in one instance. We can also mirror the the organizational structure so it maps exactly to how you've got it set up. So if that means it's broken down by departments, by locations, however it is, we can map it here. And one of the benefits is, we can have unlimited users in our system. What that means is you don't need to purchase additional Sage licenses to have your approvers or anyone granted access into AP automation. We could also take it a step further, and you could really define it on a per user basis what each individual can see and do in the platform. So for example, let's say I'm in marketing and I don't necessarily need to see the activity from the other departments. You could define it on my profile. So when I log in, I basically just wouldn't see the other departments. I would only see marketing and the activity that relates to me. Similarly, at the top here, if you have users coming into the system and they're only approving invoices, they don't necessarily code or process invoices, We can also hide these tabs, so when they come in, they'll only see the Approvals tab and the work that they need to complete. Now, you'll notice as I navigate to the other modules that everything in terms of the layout stays exactly the same. And the only thing that really changed was the color of the module. So we've designed the system this way on purpose to make training fast and easy. Once you've learned one of the modules, you should have a really good understanding of how the rest of the system works. So I'll go ahead and get started at the top here at the purchase order level. Now, I do want to, of course, say that purchase orders are optional. This is not a required module to use, but of course, throughout, in the presentation, you saw that as you use purchase orders, this does add another layer of control as well in your business, as you can foresee the spend and kind of approve it before the services or goods arrive. Another thing to note is if you currently create purchase orders directly in Sage, that's completely fine as well. We could actually import that data into our software, and it would essentially come over to the committed tab and match with the invoice. And I'll get into more detail on that later. But for now, we'll start at the create here. This means that you're creating your requisition directly in our system, and the purchase order will also be created in our system. So first, we'll select the company you're creating the requisition for, complete the vendor here, and you'll notice the vendor list, your account list, and basically any standard list, they will be pulled in directly from Sage. So however you've got it set up there is what you'll see here. And that also means if the vendor is not created within Sage yet, you can't just create a fake vendor here. It does have to be coming directly from Sage. Now, let's say I'm looking for Bayfield Investments. Perfect. You see, you can just type in a word of the string here to quickly locate it. Same for the account. Let's say I'm looking for an expense account. Type that in like so. Fill out all the details as you know. And then at this point, you can go ahead and submit it for approval. We'll jump into the approval setting in a moment, but as an approver, what it looks like is you'd essentially be notified via email that there is a requisition waiting for your approval. You'll come over to the system here at the Approvals tab, where you can see at a high level the information pertaining to that requisition. You could also click on this icon to view the image that we generate for you based on the data, to then approve or reject as a batch. Otherwise, jump directly into the requisition itself to view the details at this level, and same thing, approve or reject from this screen. Now, if you are rejecting anything in the system, you will be required to leave a comment. And you'll notice here that comments will be logged on with the requisition itself, and it will be sent back to whoever originally created it. Now, assuming it has been approved, the purchase order will now come over to our committed tab. So again, if you are creating purchase orders directly in Sage right now, this is also where that purchase order data will flow into our system here at the committed. So at this level, it gives you, a high-level overview of what's already been drawn against that purchase order, what's remaining, the totals, and so forth. And until all purchase orders have been matched to an invoice is when they'll move over to the Close tab. So the Close tab will really just store all of the information that has gone through our system that pertains to the purchase order. Now let's tie it in more with the invoice module here. And I'll start at the top of the create. So here at the create, this is how you'll get paper-based invoices into the system. So if they're being mailed still or invoices are being dropped off in person, all you'll have to do is actually batch scan all of the pages together, whether you have a stack of 10 pages, or 20 pages, drag and drop the file here, upload, and you'll notice all of the pages appear in our system like so. Now, to quickly separate this batch, it's a click of a button, And if you had any multi-paged invoices, you can simply just drag and drop to organize. So think of this page here as, your PDF editor, the other actions at the top here if you needed to rotate pages and so forth, making it super easy for you to organize those pages. Once completed, you would just go ahead and click Save, Create Invoices, and all of these will now move on over to the next step. Now, if you currently receive electronic invoices, you'll also be set up with a Sage AP Automation email address. So you can start sharing this email address to your vendors, or if you've already got an existing invoices email address set up, we can help you set up some auto forwarding rules from your inbox over to ours. And what happens is we essentially pull in all of the invoice attachments, and they will automatically feed into our system and come on over to the in progress queue. So those electronic invoices will skip create, and those be pulled in directly over to here. Now, the final way to get invoices into the system is by using our mobile app. So if you wanted to, you could actually snap a photo of your bill and have it uploaded here as well. Now, as long as you've done, one of 3 different ways to get invoices into the system by the end of your day, by the next morning is when you'll see it appear here in progress with some of the information already captured for you. So let's jump into an example. What we automatically capture includes the header information, so the vendor, the date, the due date, as well as the subtotals, totals, and taxes. So all that's left for you to complete are the line item details, but there are a few different ways we can help with this as well. Now, the first way, as I mentioned earlier, we do facilitate the purchase order and invoice match. Now, in this example, you can see there has been a purchase order identified to match with this invoice, and you can even scroll down to view the details here, and go ahead and split the screen to see both documents side by side. Now, since the coding has already been done on the purchase order level, to complete the invoice level, all you'll have to do is actually select the lines that you'd like to apply onto the invoice and adopt it over, like so. So the coding is done at this point, and you can go ahead and submit it for approval. Now, if it's not associated to a purchase order, again, that's completely fine. We do also have smart code technology. So smart code works best when you've got bills that are, often reoccurring and typically coded the same way every time based on vendor. So when that's the case, just click smart code and our system will populate the details for you just based on the last way it was done in our system. So it's complete and ready to be submitted for approval. Now, finally, if PO adoption or smart code do not apply, again, you'll notice that these fields and the list will be pulled in directly from Sage. So you can just jump directly into it, quickly locate the account, code it as so, and submit it for approval. So same thing, your approvers will be notified via email that they have invoices waiting for their approval. They could also be notified by our mobile app if they have that downloaded. And same thing at a high level here, you could approve all of these as a batch or jump directly in to view the details. Now, talking about approvals, let's jump into the settings to walk you through how we set up the approval logic. So you'll notice here you can create different approval channels for each module. I'll jump into the invoice side here. Global rules right now just indicates that these approval channels I have set up apply to all of my companies. But of course, you can create specific channels for each company. And let's open up an example here. So you'll see in this case, you can of course label the channel however you'd like. And this is where you can identify certain dollar amounts or thresholds. So for example, let's say you have, certain managers that can approve up to $5,000, But once it exceeds $5,000, you need an additional manager or a director to approve the invoice as well. So you could indicate those rules here. So in this case, let's say anything above $5,000. Now, you'll notice below, you can pull in any standard list to route your approvals for. So in this case, I've got vendors, or you can pull in a specific account list, determine it based on department. Let's just say I'll do it by account here, and we'll hit save. So you'll see now that creates those boxes for the rules. Click onto this pen icon here for my account list, which is available on the left. And let's just pick a few here and pull them over. So in this example, what it's saying is any invoice that is above $5,000 and coded to these accounts will automatically be routed to Beansprout, in my case. And let's open this up. Now, to simply add on more layers of approval, you'll just select those users on the left and drag them over. So now what this channel is saying is the invoice will first have to be approved by Bean, secondly by Jack, and then finally by Jill. So we automatically route the invoice for approval to the next person once the previous person has approved their step. They finished their approval and it's ready to move on to the next. Our system will automatically notify the next approver. What we can also do is we can actually group users together. So in this case, let's say we have two managers and you really just need one of them to approve. So you can group them together. They'll both receive the notification, and whoever approves it first completes the channel. So you'll notice with the approval channels, you can use both the and or logic, and it's super easy to drag and drop and organize how you'd like to determine this. Now let's jump back over to the invoice module and continue on here at the export level. So here at export, this is where all your approved invoices will be displayed. And you'd note they're approved with these big A bubbles here. Now you can do a final review at this point because this is where you determine when you're ready to sync this data back over to Sage. When we're ready to do so, you'd simply select all, go to Actions, Export Data, and all of this information we've captured will sync over to your Sage financial system, and it'll appear as if you've manually coded it yourself. Once exported, they'll disappear from the screen, but you'll now find the invoices available under the Archive tab. So think of your Archive tab as your online filing cabinet now, where we will actually store all of this information and all of those pages for 7 years. Of course, you can organize it however you'd like, whether that's based on the vendor, perhaps the due date. You could also use our search function at the top here. Let's say, I'm looking for all of my Amazon bills. Just type that in to quickly locate them instead of going to actual filing cabinets and looking for those invoices paper-based. And what you could also do is create custom filters. So perhaps you have to run a report every month or every quarter based on, let's say, a set of accounts or based on dollar amounts, whatever it is. You can specify that here as a filter, pulling in any type of criteria, highlight your filter, and our system will narrow down the results that match your filter. So for our reporting options, you can either create an Excel or PDF. I'll just show you an example of a PDF report here based on all of my archived invoices. We'll quickly generate that, and you'll notice it downloads directly onto my computer here. So at any point in time, if you needed to run a report, you always have access to your data, and you can decide to do so. Open up the PDF, and you'll notice on the first page, it gives you a high-level summary of all the invoices I've just ran a report on. And let's say, I want to look at invoice number 12 in more detail. You can scroll all the way down, or you'll actually see that each of these are hyperlinked. So let's click on it, and it takes you directly to the page within the report now. Here you can see the invoice image, header information, line item details, and your audit trail as well. So you'll be able to see who approved it or who rejected it on which date, and if there were any comments left. Additionally, if it were associated to a purchase order or any backup documents, you can scroll down and see it directly below. So in this case, here's a backup document with this invoice. So when it comes to audits, we definitely had clients, download these reports and email it off to their auditors, as everything is completely indexed and searchable. Or because we allow for unlimited user access again at no additional charge, you can even grant your auditors read-only access to come into the software here to do their own searching and reporting. All right, so that wraps up the invoice module, and we'll tie it all together now with the last module, which is payments. And similarly with purchase orders, our payments module is optional, but of course it is available here for you to use if you'd like our workflow, again, with the approval processes as well. Now, before jumping into that, I'd like to just talk a little bit more about our bilateral sync, so the constant sync we have with your Sage financial system. And what this means is, you could definitely issue a payment in-house, just like you normally are. Let's say you want to cut a check in-house, or you need to make a credit card payment. That's completely fine. Now, as long as you indicate in Sage that you've paid that particular bill, you'll notice the data also populate here in our software. So on my screen here, you can see some of these invoices have the little cash icon next to them. This just means that you've paid these bills already in Sage. And if you actually click on the icon, it'll reference the, the checking number or the reference number, the total amount, the date, and so forth. And so these payments or these invoices, since you already paid them in Sage, they will not come into our payments module at all. So again, you don't have to worry about duplicate payments in this case, as we will only flow down the invoices in the Create tab here that have not been paid yet. And here at Create, you'll see that we automatically group your invoices based on vendor. You've got your age payables list here, and start selecting which ones you're ready to create for payment. Click Create, and the ones that you've selected will move over to the In Progress queue. Now, here in Progress, this is where you'll define how you'd like to pay the invoice, as well as which bank account you'd like to pay it out of. So we integrate with all US and Canadian bank accounts and credit unions. And if you've got multiple accounts to each company, that's completely fine as well. You'll notice your banks will be set up here on the drop-down for you to select which one you'd like to pay out of. And the payment methods that we currently offer include checks, meaning that we'll actually mail out and send the check to your vendors for you. Additionally, EFT transactions, and we also have a virtual credit card program. So at this point, you would just select, which payment method you'd like to pay this out of. Of course, if your vendor specifies, they prefer EFT payments, this would just be defaulted. And at this point, you can go ahead and submit this for approval now. So similar to the last two modules, we'll trigger that email notification to your approvers. And this is where you could determine, separate approval channels for the payment side. So your invoice approvals can be completely different. And think of the payments approvals as, the people who actually sign off on the checks. Instead of physically signing on the, the check itself, we could just route them as approvers here for them to then approve or reject the invoice and the payment. Once payments have been approved, they'll move on over to the Releases tab. Now here at Releases, this is when you're indicating to us that you're ready for us to actually mail out the check for you or initiate the EFT by selecting it and clicking Release Payments. So you always have full control of when you'd like to do this. So think of it as doing, if you do your check runs every other day or every other week, for example, same thing. You could come into here every other week. You'll notice all of your approved payments ready to go, select them, and release it for that date. Once payments have been released, you'll find the data now available under the Paid tab. And Paid is going to act exactly the same as we've seen in the invoice export, where this data now syncs back over to Sage as well, and it will mark those invoices as paid. And finally, Archived and Report are pretty straightforward. Archived will display again all of the information that has gone through the system in regards to payments, and Report allows you to create those Excel or PDF reports. And so that wraps up the demo portion of the webinar. Of course, if you'd like more information on how this would relate to your exact workflow or more of a personalized demo, feel free to get in contact with myself or with your BAASS account manager. And I'll jump back over to here and let's see if we have any questions.
So if there are any questions, you can just enter them in the chat box and we'll read them out for you. I do have a few questions that came in during the presentation, so we'll go over those ones. So the first one is, which payment methods are supported?
Yep, perfect. So it would be checks right now, so physical checks, EFTs, and virtual credit card.
Okay, the next question I have is, what kind of customer support is included?
Yeah, that's a great question. So customer support is going to be built into your plan. So we do have a few different plans in terms of our pricing packages, but it will be built into support starting off with the basic plan, which gives you response within 1 business day. And then of course it increases as your plan increases.
So the next question is kind of going off of that, but what is the pricing for the product? I'm not sure if you have those details.
Yeah, so we can definitely get in touch and talk about pricing because it will be pretty different for everyone online today. There are a few different factors to consider. So of course, which modules you're interested in using, the volume of invoices you do per month, of course, the level of support you'd expect, and the number of companies you have. So there are a few different factors. That's why, if you are interested in learning more about what that would look like for your company, I do highly recommend that you get in touch with us.
The next question I have is, how long does it take to get up and running?
Yep, so for our implementation process, we will dedicate you 1 customer success manager throughout the, that's the setup time. And on average, we find that clients are fully up and running within 6 to 8 hours. So with our, our integration with Sage already, it is pretty seamless. We do only ask for about 6 hours of your time in total, spread across, a couple of days or even a couple of weeks to do the training, the workflow, and the technical.
The next question I have is, can I set a due date for approver action?
Good question. So for approvers, at this time, you wouldn't be able to set a due date, but in terms of follow-up, if you're used to running back and forth between offices to hunt down approvers, we actually take care of the follow-up for you. That means the notification settings, you can specify that you want to notify, the approver every single day. And how that works is that approver will still receive emails until they've actually jumped into the platform and approved all of their outstanding invoices. So we'll take care of the follow-up for you.
Next question I have is, does it fully integrate with all Sage products, or is it limited to specific Sage products?
So at the time, we integrate with Sage 50, 100, 300, and 500.
Okay. Another question I have here is, do you have additional training on fraud prevention?
Yep, if you'd like additional training, again, please reach out to us directly and we can get in touch and determine the details of what you'd like training on.
Okay. And the last question I have here is, it's just if there is going to be a recording of the webinar, and the answer to that is yes, it's going to be sent out after the presentation is completed. Once the webinar is available, we will send it out via email. So it looks like that's all the questions that we have for today. So with that being said, I would just like to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy days as well as Tina for presenting today. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Bye now.